Hi, this is Dan Buller, retired electronics engineer on the front deck of my house, but again, it's lovely. It's New Year's Eve, so here we go. I wanted to address this thing that I got, this comment from this guy, Neo. I don't know his name, but he left a comment, and you're welcome to leave comments on my videos, and I'll address them, and hopefully I won't have to call you a fucking idiot. But Neo's not a fucking idiot. He had a good question. He says, I got to know about you through your op-amp videos. I wanted to ask a question. How do I understand complex analogs or circuitry concepts? I've in my second year of electronics and communication. I have very little knowledge since our university highly dumps theoretical knowledge in the process of memorizing formulas and remembering circuits. I fall in pursuit of the true acquisition because I hate to memorize things. I totally know where you're coming from. I'll try to give you some advice, but first things first, you are who you are. Your DNA determines who you are. So, nothing I say will have any impact on what you do. But, you can kind of keep this in mind as you go through this stuff. Remember, I mentioned this book, The Half-Life of Facts, pretty much for anybody who starts college and goes off and becomes, for example, a doctor. By the time they graduate, half the things they learned in college were disproven. So, and that's true for a lot of things. I mean, things change all the time. Knowledge is like just an approximation of what's really going on. I mean, we've been going for, I don't know how many years, thinking about the Big Bang, and the Big Bang was for real, and there was a TV show called Big Bang Theory. Well, James Webb Telescope went up there and proved that the Big Bang never happened. Whoa, that's like a big thing. So, the whole world believed in the Big Bang, and now, what do we do? What do we think? What do we try to figure out now? It's like, what happened, Maybe this God thing is real, who knows? Probably not. But I totally understand where you're coming from. What they're trying to do is, they're trying to get paid. That's what the university is doing. They're trying to get money out of you. And they have to make something look good to you so that you continue to pay them. Now, like I said in my other videos, I don't have a degree. I never wanted a degree, and I sure as hell don't want a degree now. My son, who has a master's degree, has an MBA, he said, oh, Dad, you should, get a degree, and then you could teach in college. I'm like, fuck that. If they won't listen to me now, they're not going to listen to me after I get a degree, and I'm 66 years old. It's way too late for me to get a degree. It's like, I'm not going to be able to pay it off. I leave my wife with a lot of debt. Fuck that shit. So, I think I did better, and let me tell you why I think not getting a degree is a good thing. And you can say, oh, this is rationalization of a guy who's too lazy to get a degree. Well, here's the thing, the day that my going away party from the Navy, I was getting out of the Navy, the day of my going away party, my wife told me she was pregnant with my first son, the guy who's got an MBA. So there was no way for me to go get a degree. I had a kid on the way, I had to go get a job, and so I did that, and I struggled along and made, went to TTC and Bay Valley Tech, TTC, Genrad, and Credence, and then all the others that came along. What I did, and this is just my behavior, the way my DNA is programmed, I tried not to let people know that I didn't have a degree. I didn't ever say that I had a degree. But I remember when I was at Genrad, for example, I was teaching class on the GR16 on the maintenance course, and I overheard somehow, I can't remember how, but I overheard this guy explaining to someone else about his instructor in the Genrad class, and he said, this guy's been to Berkeley. He's a genius. Well, I've been to Berkeley. I went to Berkeley as a kid, and I bought rings and garbage, that the hippies were selling, but I never went to college at Berkeley. He just assumed that my stories about Berkeley were about going to college in Berkeley. So I never pretended that I had a degree. In fact, I know people who pretended and claimed to have a degree when they didn't. And that's really dishonest. So I never claimed I had a degree, and eventually I got past the point where I had to worry about it. And the way I did it was I basically kept my mouth shut and listened, and then, this is the secret. I listened to what people said, and then I'd go off and test it, whatever it was. They'd say stuff, and I'd go, okay, let me go find out how that works. So, like, for example, on the Genrad, they had an active load, which forced current. I'd never heard of such a thing. I was in the Navy. I was working on tubes and shit. I'd never heard of such a thing. So I went and looked at how the Genrad active load worked, and I realized, this is a forced current situation. So it forces current, and whatever the voltage becomes, the voltage becomes. And there's limits to how far it can go, but generally for most devices, forcing current, you're not going to hit the clamp, the end of the line. So it works out just fine. And I learned all about current forcing, and I learned it myself. Why? Because I worked for Genrad. Genrad made testers that tested things. I could test anything in the world, and because I was a trainer, it probably would have been the same if I had been an applications engineer. But as a trainer, I could do experiments, and so I would take the time, their time, to do experiments, and I just chalked it up to me getting a better grasp of the equipment and a better grasp of the background and the knowledge behind it. So if you can find a job like that, Neo, that's the thing to do. Find a job where they'll let you play with a tester or whatever the machine is. Play with it and let them pay you for that. That was the great thing about being in training. I spent the time that I didn't spend teaching, I would spend working on the tester, and I would do all kinds of things. I wrote this program when I was at Credence called Speech, and what it did was it used a microphone to record your speech into just a 4K memory. It was a half second at 8 kilohertz sample rate. And so I could take that and then do stuff with it. I could do an echo, I could play it in reverse, I could do all kinds of stuff because it was data that I captured from the microphone. And so I learned a lot about how that stuff worked. And I learned a lot about DSP and FFTs and the whole shebang. And I worked with guys who had degrees. And so, for example, when I did my speech program, I did an FFT on the speech. And my friend Cliff So said, oh, you can't do that. It's not like a continuous sine wave or a continuous wave, so you can't do that. I'm like, well, I did it, I worked, I got to see the spectrum of my speech. So this guy, Cliff So, who had a degree, was telling me something that wasn't true. So I knew, and I'd seen it many times, I knew that people with degrees didn't know anything. They were just spouting back crap that their professors told them. That's Tony. Tony, same thing. He doesn't understand electronics. He's just spouting back stuff that his professor told him. He doesn't have a clue. That's why he changes his mind between harmonics being caused by the quadratic nature of transistors or the exponential nature of transistors. He doesn't know. He's just remembering complicated words. Remember I told you about Chebyshev polynomials. If it sounds complicated and if they look at it and it is complicated, that's their excuse. And it has nothing to do with that. Harmonics have nothing to do with exponential or quadratic anything or Chebyshev polynomials. Nothing to do with any of that. It's all due to the phase angle where the distortion happens. It has nothing to do with harmonic currents or harmonic voltages or any of that stuff. These are things that their professors told them. So, get a job where you're training, maybe, whatever you have to do. If you get a job as an applications engineer or whatever, so go ahead and get your engineering degree. It's harder now to do applications or training without a degree. It's really tough. But I didn't have a degree because I didn't have the time. I got out of the Navy. I had a baby coming, so I had to make money, and so that's what I did. And in the end, I had 3 kids, and it was a good thing, you know. Bruce Tibbets had 0 kids, and what happened there? Well, you know, I have a couple of theories, you know, but it involves the wrong hole and stuff like that. His wife could answer that, but I'm not going to ask her. A number of things came up while I was doing this. When I was working in Fremont, California for Credence, I constantly did my best to learn from things like Tin Lam, who was doing the ISD device, which was EEPROM device that captured analog for enunciators. This is before they had a lot of memory that you could use for capturing analog. They made a chip that was based on EEPROM that captured not just ones and zeros, it captured the voltages of speech. So you could do that the little card that says open it up and then record your message and then take this thing out, and now when you open it, it'll play your message. And you could re-record it if you want. It was just EEPROM. And it worked pretty good. So I became the apps engineer for Tin Lam because there was no apps engineer for Tin Lam. The only apps engineer on the West Coast for the mixed signal stuff was a guy named John Cedar, who was pretty smart. Not that smart, but he was pretty smart. But I needed to support Tin Lam, and so I learned a lot from Tin Lam. And one of the things I learned from Tin Lam was Excel and how to do FFTs and all that stuff in Excel. So I got really good at hanging out with customers and being with customers, and we got a new guy, a guy named, believe it or not, Harry Wiener. It was Harold Wiener, but he went by Harry. So he says, you can call me Harold Wiener, you can call me Harry, just don't call me Harry Wiener. He was a fun guy, but because he was going to work on my products, the mixed signal, he needed to be trained. He'd never done any of this stuff before, so I trained him. And one thing I did was I would take him to customer sites with me. I didn't have any business going to customer sites, but I would get calls from salespeople or from applications engineers or whoever to go on sales on tours at factory sites from our customers. And so one time I took Harry to a customer, and he'd his eyes opened like, whoa, this is what they do? Oh my God. So I knew what the customers did, so when I was training them, I knew what they were going to be facing when they went back after training. Harry didn't know that, so I took Harry with me, and I think we went to Sierra Semiconductor, where they made modems and stuff like that, and Sigma Delta DACs, Sigma Delta ADCs. They did some fun stuff. And I got to know all the people there. Harry got to know them, and we learned a lot. We came back, and my boss, Stephanie, she's terrible. Stephanie jumped on my shit and said, where have you been? I said, well, me and Harry went to visit Sierra. We wanted to, help out the customer, and, we weren't teaching a class. We were in development time, so it was a good time to train Harry. If you ever do that again, it'll reflect negatively on your review. Couldn't believe it. Here's a woman who's my boss telling me to not go to a customer site and see what the customers are doing and learn about what the customer is doing. And I'm not teaching a class. It's not like I abandoned a class. So me and Stephanie didn't get along very good, as you can imagine. She was terrible. She was terrible. Because of Stephanie, I went 4 years without a computer on my desk. 4 years, no computer. So when I developed training material, I had to do it on other people's Macs, secretaries, or whoever I could borrow time on their computer. And that's how it was really slow to develop a training course with nothing but that. But eventually, Stephanie went away, and I ended up getting into apps. And thanks to Mick Francesch, and he got me into doing apps, and I was doing international apps. It was my slanty eyes, Tony. My slanty eyes got me the job in international apps where I supported Europe and Asia. And Asia, of course, I kind of looked like them, so it was okay, you know. But I learned a lot about what's going on, Philips, Siliconware, TSMC. I mean, I can't name all the companies that I went to. But I learned a lot by being an apps engineer. And I had to write code for customers, and I wrote code for all kinds of customers. You should really read my book, Reluctant Road Warrior. It's pretty... I put a lot into it. That's what I have to say about learning things. Learn as much as you can. Learn, and you learn all kinds of things, and you have to learn to ignore people who don't know what they're talking about. And because I knew Big Signal, and most other people that I knew were like not just intimidated but terrified of mixed signal, that is DSP, digital signal processing. So they just did ones and zeros, right? So they wrote ones and zeros, or they took ones and zeros from the customer and turned them into patterns that would go in the tester and test the chip. That's the stuff that they got into. I had to do mixed signal. Why? Because my boss said, you're going to do mixed signal. Not Stephanie, some other guy. You're going to do mixed signal. And I'm like, okay, I'll try, you know. And I did. Now, take on whatever challenges come along your way. Anything that comes your way. When I was at Credence up here in Beaverton, one of the things that came up was a customer, I think it was Plessy, who they used to make printers in England. And so Plessy had two people who were coming to the States to figure out whose tester they were going to buy. And I think it was a toss-up between Credence and a company back in Minnesota. And I can't remember the name right now. The salesman explained it to the customers. And he said, okay, Dan, he's the only guy who will do this. Everyone else said, no way, I'm not training these people. Every other apps engineer, I mean, they had paychecks depending on them doing things that their boss told them to do. But their boss didn't force them to do this. So the salesman said, is anybody around who will do this? Dan, will you do it? I said, yeah, I'll do it. That's the secret. So what I did was, believe it or not, it was great. And this is in my book. The salesman explained that Dan was just learning the Vista, the Credence Vista, and that Dan would help develop this test program for them that they wanted to see how it worked. Dan would help develop this. Oh, look, it's a boat. And Dan didn't know much about the tester. I was relatively new to the Vista. I've been doing the SCS 3000 for quite a few years. But I was learning the Vista, and they said, you know, you kind of lowered expectations. You know, Dan's not really good at this Vista thing, so give him a break. Because on the SCS 3000, I was doing Pascal. On the Vista, I was doing C, and like I said, I really hate C. So these two guys, they were fun, but they were like, you know, they were pushing the envelope. I did the best job I could. Do the best job you can. That's my best advice. Do the best job you can. And because they were customers and they were from England, they were from out of town, I would take them out at night. And guess where I take them? Take them to strip clubs. Now, I'm a good boy. I don't mess around with my wife. You know, I never have. But my uncle did. He used to sell sheetrock for U.S. whatever it was. So he used to take guys out and get them laid. I didn't know this until later. But I took these guys out to the strip clubs in Portland. And they had a really good time. They really enjoyed it. We finished up the exercise. I think it took like a week. So I did the program for them. And then they flew off to Minneapolis, where they went to visit this other guy, this other company that did a tester. They built a tester, and these guys got to go spend the same time with them and do all that. But you know what? Minneapolis doesn't have strip clubs, as far as I know. So they went back home, and then a couple weeks later, we got the message that Plessy's going to choose the Vista, the Credence Vista. So the salesman was thrilled that I was able to do that job and make that sale. It was like a $2 million sale. And this was back in the 1990s. So that was a good deal. The customers flew from London to go to training. They had to go to training in Portland. Guess where they went? The first place they went. They didn't go to their hotel. That's the first place I always go. They didn't go to Credence. Nope. They went to the last strip club I took them to. So they came for the strip club. So what happened? Every day they would go through training on the Vista, and then every night they would go out to the strip clubs and have a good time. So whatever it takes. Now, I'm not saying go get guys laid, like my uncle used to do, but, whatever it takes, be a good friend to these people. Now, again, I'm saying this, I know that, some people will take that and say, oh yeah, that's a good idea, and then never do it because your DNA controls your behavior. So if you're a nice guy, you'll be a nice guy no matter what. And if you're a jerk, and some people think I'm a jerk, but if you're a jerk to customers, they're going to think you're an asshole. So that's just the way it is. So whatever it is you have to do it. Always, always. I would do whatever the salesman wanted, whatever they wanted. I had a salesman, he says, I got a customer, he wants a demo. I was a trainer. Apps guys normally do the demos, but he came to me because nobody else would do the demo. So I did the demo, and guess what? He loved me. Unfortunately, he crashed his plane. So that was the end of him and all the work that I did impressing him. But still, whoever is asking you to do stuff, don't become a pawn, but do your very best to impress the people you work for or the people who can help you. In fact, when I worked for Credence, my boss was Stephanie, but I tried like hell to impress Stephanie, and it didn't have any effect at all. So I worked at impressing the salespeople and the other apps engineers and the other apps managers. And I actually had an apps manager tell me, you should become an apps engineer. And guess what? I became an apps engineer. It was a good move. I became an apps engineer, and then later, a friend of mine at Credence, Mike Furland, brilliant guy, brilliant. He could, Rosasnot, he would say transistor backwards. He was just brilliant. His brain was so good. But he got a job with Nextest, and Rick Carmichael, who was the manager there, asked Mike, who's the best apps engineer you know? And Mike told him, Dan Bullard. And so they came looking for me, and they recruited me, and I got like a 50% raise. So Neil, here's the thing. You want a big ass raise? Do what I'm telling you. I got a 50% raise coming out of Credence. I was already making six figures, so I got a 50% raise coming out the door, and over $100,000 in stock. Right there, boom, like that. Just because Mike thought I was the best apps engineer he'd ever met. So be a nice person. Don't be a dick. If they ask you to do something, when I was, like I said, when these guys came from Plessy, none of the apps engineers would have anything to do with them. They wanted nothing to do with that project. And I said, I'll do it. And they said, yeah, you're it, man, you're it. And I wasn't very good at it. I have to admit, I wasn't very good because I wasn't really that familiar with the Vista. But in the end, I got the deal, $2 million, and partly because I took them to the strip clubs. So, taking customers to strip clubs was my thing, and I knew a lot of the strippers. In one case, kind of a fun story. I used to go to Mamma Mia's, take the customers to Mamma Mia's, which was an Italian restaurant and also a strip club. And there's one gal that I saw pretty often there. So one time I went to Stars, another strip club, and this gal was dancing. She showed up, and that was a gal that I remembered, but she was doing an audition. And so she's doing the audition. I'm like, hey, I know you. And she says, yeah, I know you. So they did a song, and she's sitting there with her top and her bottoms on. And which she was used to that over at Mamma Mia, because at Mamma Mia, first song you do it with your top and your bottom on. The second song you take off the top, and then the third song you take off your bottom and you show off your pussy. That's the way it works, okay? But at Stars it was 2 songs, so they played 2 songs. So during her act, she came over and talked to me. And she said, I don't know, do they do 2 songs or 3? And I said, they do 2 songs. They only do 2 songs. So if I were you, I'd get busy taking stuff up. So she ended up taking off her top, and then at the end, she took off her bottom. And she got the job. So I helped her get the job, simply because I knew what they were doing versus what they were doing at Mamma Mia's. And, you know, I was not a pervert. I went there, I took customers there, and the customers loved it. As I mentioned in another video, we had one customer who came from when I worked for Intel, or Schlumberger, and I was stationed at Intel. One customer came over from Malaysia, and we took him out every day for lunch and every night for dinner. Not every night, but you know, we take him out a lot for lunch and dinner. The last night he was going to be there, we took him to the strip club, and he was furious. And he says, why did you take me to this place on my last day? Why didn't you take me to this place on my first day? That way I could go back again and again. So he never got a chance to go back. He was furious with us, despite the fact we took him to a strip club. So, you know, don't do things that are against your principles, okay? I mean, when I first went to a strip club in Texas, I didn't like it. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want anything to do with it. But up here, that was the way to get customers. And, you know, Portland's famous for it. So that was the way to get customers. So don't break your principles. You know, don't hang out with bad people. Don't get your customers on drugs or anything. But be good to people. Give them what they want. Buy them lunch. Buy them dinner. Whatever it takes. You know, be nice to them. When those Koreans came over from South Korea, and they expected me to do everything. I got them an apartment, I got them a rental car, I found an Asian food store, I did everything for them. And they didn't appreciate that, but that's just what I do. So, get yourself in a position where you're going to deal with customers. Be an apps engineer or a trainer or whatever and if you have to get a degree so that you can be a trainer or whatever, do that. Be good to your customers. Customers come first. Every prostitute says that. The customer comes first. If I come to, that's a benefit, that's a plus, you know, but the customer comes first, always. Customer comes first. Do whatever you can to make the customer happy. And learn as you go. Always keep your mind open. And ignore what they told you in school, you know. If they're telling you crap that's not true, just plan on it. They're telling you stuff that's not true, guaranteed. So keep your mind open. The way I avoided it was I never had a degree, and so I had to learn all this stuff on my own. And in the end, I knew more than everybody. I learned everything myself. And I had to do FFTs. Luckily, I had some help. My buddy Dave Reynolds, he helped me. He reviewed my book, Distortion. He really liked it. But take on every challenge. Every challenge. I wasn't an apps engineer when I was a trainer. I was a trainer. But I did the apps engineer job because I had to and because customers wanted me to. So I did it, and I made a difference. I sold millions of dollars worth of equipment to customers. And make yourself, my bosses loved me. They loved me because I brought in business. I brought in all kinds of business. I got us noticed everywhere. So that's a big deal. Make sure the customers are happy. Make sure they get what they want, and give them everything you can. Everything. So that's my advice, okay? Take it with a grain of salt, whatever, but that's my advice. If you have to get a degree in order to be successful, do that. But I was able to get away without it because I had a kid on the way. Luckily, he's 40 now. So he got through it, I got through it, and I did extremely well. Extremely well. Not as good as like Donald Trump, but I did pretty good. And you can ask my wife. We made a lot of money, and we lived a good life. So that's my advice to you, Neo. Work on learning as you go, learning from what you do as you go through life, and forget about what your professors said. They're telling you garbage anyway, and it's not true. Learn it as you can. And being a trainer, I got to play with multi-million-dollar testers all the time. I mean, when I was an apps engineer, I got pretty good results. But when the people that I worked with, the test engineers, they'd have to sign up for an hour of test time once a week. So they didn't hardly get to actually use the tester at all. Me, I got to use the testers in the training center, and I got to use them all the time. All the time. I got lots and lots and lots of tester time. So I got to play with machines that could do FFTs, do DSP, capture signals, force voltages, force currents, measure voltages, measure currents. I mean, if you can get into ATE, that's the automatic test industry, do that. Automatic test equipment is what it's called. But if you get into that, great, do that. If you have to become a test engineer, well, yeah, you better have a really, really good understanding what's going on in the first place, and you won't get a lot of time to do experiments. That's one of the big advantages of being a trainer, is you get access to a machine all the time. You get to do experiments, you get to learn, and you can use the excuse that, well, I'm learning how this works. In fact, I even use that on people at Tektronix, well, I'm teaching this guy how this stuff works. Well, it was kind of a lie, but that's okay. I mean, my career came first. What they did, luckily, mostly jived with what I wanted to do. But be good to the customers. Customer comes first, and learn as you go. Make yourself better. Take on responsibilities. Take on challenges. Jump in there. Grab a hold, and don't let go. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do it, because you just might surprise somebody. I mean, but what did Bruce Tibbetts say? Dan doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, guess what? Dan does know what he's talking about, and I learned it by going in and challenging what Bruce and everybody else told me about harmonics. They're all liars. They don't think so, but they're all liars. Tony is a liar. They're all liars. They don't know what's going on. I do. So that's my advice, Neil. Go in there and be good to your customers. Learn what you can and move on. And you'll get, I mean, I went from trainer all the way up to marketing applications engineer, senior marketing applications engineer. I was doing really good. And then, once I hit my 50s, I started slowing down and doing, lesser things. But I had that in the back of my head. In fact, I remember being in the Schlumberger class. And I was in this class with all these people. And the instructor was saying, okay, what happens here? And I said, oh, this happens. And, he'd say, well, what happens here? And I said, well, this is what happens. And people came up to me and said, how do you know that? I said, look, I've been doing this a long time. I've been in mixed signal and in test forever, so I know all this stuff. I mean, this stuff really makes a lot of sense to me. So be open, learn, challenge authority, challenge what people tell you because they're probably telling you garbage, and try really hard to make the customers happy. That's my advice. Okay, Neil? Anyway, Happy New Year. Hopefully you had a good Christmas. And once again, this is Dan Bullard from the river. See ya.